So Jyrki, when did you first become interested in aviation?
When I was a small kid, maybe 5, 7 years old, when I began my schoolboy years.
And then what year did you join the Air Force?
I actually joined the Air Force already in 1966 as an engineer. Mm-hmm. At that time I was studying in University of Technology, and they hired me as an engineer, mm-hmm. not as a pilot. I was still studying in university.
So did you initially want to be an engineer, or did you want to be a pilot from the start?
Initially I wanted to be an Air Force pilot, mm-hmm. but at the age of 18, what happened, my left eye was nearsighted. Mm-hmm. And the doctor said that you are not accepted. So I decided that if I not be a fighter pilot, I like to be an aeronautical engineer.
Okay.
So
that's how you got your start?
Yeah, that's how I started in the Air Force as an engineer.
Mm-hmm. So when you got commissioned to be a pilot, can you tell us some of the aircraft you started training on?
Well, I was lucky to go to the pilot training when I was already 25. And actually at that time I was working in the Air Force as an engineer. And my left eye was okay at that time. And I was accepted to a pilot training in 1968. That was a special pilot course. At that time the reserve pilot training in the Air Force, they didn't fly when they were the conscript period of 1 year. But this was different course. We were hired to be just pilots. We had to make an assignment for 3 years to serve as a pilot. Mm-hmm. And in that course, we just flew 130 hours. And that was very good pilot course in the Air Force. It was flight officer course number 40. Mm-hmm. It was a kind of a test. Mm-hmm. We just trained pilots, not officers.
Mm-hmm. And what aircraft was that on?
The primary training was with the Saab Zafir.
Mm-hmm. And what was that like to fly?
Just like any light aircraft, mm-hmm. with 180 horsepower, mm-hmm. with aerobatic capabilities. Mm-hmm. And after some 25 hours in Zafir, we began the training with this Fuga.
Mm-hmm. So obviously we can see it behind us here. Can you tell us what the training was like on this aircraft and what it was like to fly?
Okay, for me it was an old friend, because during my years as an engineer, the 2 years in the Air Force, my friends let me fly Fuga from the backseat. So to me it was an old friend.
Yeah.
So I cannot tell how it feels if you are flying for the first time, because mm-hmm. I got some maybe almost 100 hours in the backseat. Mm-hmm.
So you had a few trips before, so you
I knew the tricks. So the instructors wondering, in the first flight was a kind of familiarization flight mm-hmm. from the backseat, and instructor said that if you want to fly from the backseat, try it from the backseat. Mm-hmm. I said yes, I want to do that, and I was flying so well, my familiarization flight, that instructor let me land it.
Oh, wow.
And then he wondered, oh, that was really nice for the first time. I didn't tell him. Well, just afternoon, that was in the morning, afternoon, the instructor pilot came to me and was very angry. Why did not you tell me that you have been flying in the flight test center before? Mm-hmm. I said, you didn't ask, sir.
Perfect answer, yeah.
Yeah, but it was very nice to fly alone a jet aircraft. It mm-hmm. was kind of all my dreams come true when I first soloed the Fuga.
Mm-hmm. And was it a powerful aircraft?
No, it is underpowered.
Underpowered, yeah.
Yeah. It weighs about 3 tons, and the only thrust is 2 times 400 kilos. 600 kilos with over 3 tons. Mm-hmm. It's not very well powered, so takeoff run is long and slow, and cruising speed is only 400 kilometers per hour. If you accelerate 20 minutes, you can go level to 600, but it takes a long time.
Sitting there, yeah. So how long did you spend on the Fuga, and where did you go after this?
Well, the pilot course at Kauhava took 1 year, and I flew there 130 hours with Fuga. Mm-hmm. That was my initial basic training in the Air Force. And after this course, I was contracted for 3 years as a pilot, not an Air Force officer, but as a pilot, a second lieutenant, lowest rank as an officer in the Air Force. And the system was there that during the first year, we flew more FUGA hours to get our Air Force wings. So I flew some 100 more hours with FUGA. And the second year at that time was, for the MiG training, was flown with the MiG-15. 1 year with that to get used to jet fighter, because FUGA was a low performance airplane compared to the MiGs. But I did not fly the MiG-15 training because at that time they thought that the MiG-15 will be phased out soon. And they wanted to check how you can move from the FUGA straight to MiG-21 with a great speed difference and performance. So I was selected as a low-time pilot to go directly from FUGA to MiG-21. So I was lucky to get on my 3rd year in the Air Force to go directly to MiG-21. So in my next year in the squadron, I got my MiG training. And it went so well that actually 2.5 years since I joined the Air Force, I was a pilot with weapons and guarding the airspace. Weak alert pilot in 2.5 years, because I got 1 year ahead because I passed the MiG-15 year.
So Jyrki, what were your first thoughts on the MiG-21?
Oh, I thought that, hey boys, that's Mach 2 fighter, that's a dream to fly to me. Dreams come true, be an Air Force fighter pilot with a fighter which is capable of Mach 2 speeds.
What version were you assigned to?
Well, at that time when I was in training, we had two-seater U models. And then we have one squadron, which means 20 MiG-21 F-13 models, which is behind me.
And what was the main role of the MiG for the Finnish Air Force at this point?
It was the most capable fighter at the time. We got them in 1963, and that was at that time was a very modern fighter.
Cutting edge at the time.
At the time, yeah, and still when I started training in 60. Or in 70, it was very capable, a day fighter, no radar, so it was a day interceptor, but performance-wise, very capable.
So can you talk us through some of your ground training on the MiG?
The ground training was ground school. We were sitting in the classroom and make notice to our notebooks and learned items by heart. And before going to even taxi, we were sitting in the cockpit for 1 week, studying all the switches, and we have to find them in the test by closed eyes. Every item, instructor asks every switch, and we have to find them by heart.
Wow. Yes. Was it difficult learning Russian systems?
Oh no problem. Actually, the most labeling was already in Finnish. And part were in Russian and part were in English, because it was an export model, so there was Finnish, Russian and English in the cockpit.
And so why did Finland actually pick the MiG-21 as their, frontline fighter?
Well, in those times we have an agreement with the Soviet Union, cooperation and friendship cooperation, and we were not actually able to buy so easily Western fighters, and there was a problem with the Soviet Union and West Germany, and there was a negotiation with Finnish leaders and Soviet leaders, and the Soviets said in '61 that West Germany is a threat to Soviet Union, and Finland has to be capable of defending its airspace. At that time we had only 12 nuts, only 12, compared to Swedish Air Force, who had 600 tunnels. We had 12 nuts. And the Khrushchev, the leader, said that if Finland does not take care of air defense, they are coming to Finland and take care of that.
Really?
And Khrushchev offered to sell a squadron of their latest fighter, MiG-21 F-13. And that's how we decided we buy them. So it was actually, they were sold to us. We never evaluated them.
Okay, so you just took them as they were.
We just took them, we bought them. That was, trade was bilateral that time. So instead of getting there from Russian cars, we got Russian fighters. At that time, that was a good selection. It was very capable, and we got it just by trading things. We didn't need any money, actually.
So we have to talk about your first flight in the MiG. What was that like? I know you were in the back seat, but it must have been incredible.
No, the first flight was in the front seat.
Okay.
Yeah, in a two-seater. We started to fly it immediately by ourselves. And the first takeoff, I remember it, the Fuka took off below 200 kilometers per hour. The MiG took off at about almost 400 kilometers per hour. So at initial takeoff, the very sensitive aileron control, I was going like this all the time, and the instructor said that don't touch the stick. And I let it go, it went very steady, but the aileron control was real fast. You could roll it in less than 1 second.
Wow, that is...
And once you learned to be very careful with aileron, it was nice to fly, very sensitive in roll, not so bad in pitch. And the first landing, I thought in final approach that this rocket will never stop to that stamp. The runway looked like a stamp, so I thought that it will never stop on that short distance. But using the drag chute, it did stop. And after some 2-3 flights, you get used to those high takeoff and landing speeds.
So did you use the chute every landing?
With the F model and the U model we used, because it had small wheels, small brakes, and we normally used the drag chute for every landing to save the brakes.
Yeah. So could you tell us some of the flying you would conduct in your training phase?
At that time, the initial training was, it was heritage from Soviet Union, and the first 2 flights were just going over the pattern with various airspeeds, configuration, and 4th and 5th flight were just in the area, turning and maneuvering slowly. No aerobatics in the first 5 training flights, which were just aiming to their first solo flight in the MiG-21 F.
Yeah.
So it was kind of Russian effect was still there, which was very not so. It followed some forms to what they used. That was developed later when we learned to fly them. But initially the training was little straight line, turn left, go straight ahead, and like that.
So what was the MiG like to handle?
As I told you, the aileron control was very sensitive and real fast. The rudder was all manual. At higher speeds, the rudder force was really heavy. It was all manual rudder. And the pitch control was nice because you have the Q feel, which changed the, it was variable with the airspeed. So for any airspeed, you have the same stick movement and power for the same G. So even at stall or even at Mach 2, we have the same feel in the pitch control.
Oh, wow.
So it was very nice to fly.
So what would you say the strengths and weaknesses of the MiG-21 were?
The weakness was the poor brakes. You have to use the drag chute. And the short endurance. With full power, like in later I was making the demonstration flights. If you fly at full afterburner, you run out of fuel in 7 minutes.
7 minutes?
With full afterburner.
So you're very sparingly with it?
Yeah, and even you couldn't use the afterburner all the time because the feeding from the wing tanks to the feeder tank was so slow that the feeder tank was emptying, and there was a warning. Tank number 3 is running out of fuel, even you have fuel in the wings. So we have to take afterburner off to get time to get the fuel from the wing tanks to the feeder tank.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So you have to follow those lamps of the tanks.
Yeah.
Not to run out of the fuel from the last tank. You still have wing tanks left.
You don't want that to happen.
This was their weakness, I think.
The weakness, yeah. And the main strength was probably its speed, I'm guessing.
Yeah. You could climb at Mach 2.
Really?
Yeah.
2, wow.
If you were going at about 40,000 feet at Mach 2, you have to either to not climb or to reduce power. It was overspeeding. Mach 205 was the limiting speed because of the directional stability.
How many trips did it take you before you actually managed to go Mach 2?
It was already, I think, on our fourth solo flight, just because when we reached the altitude of 18,000 meters, we have to offer coffee to older pilots. And also when we exceeded Mach 2, we have to offer coffee to older pilots. So they put that in the first part of the training to get free coffee from the junior pilots.
Yeah. So did you ever conduct DACT with the other types of the time?
I was only 1 year in the squadron, so I didn't get any this kind of training because I was only 1 year before I went to the test pilot course.
And you mentioned your squadron there. What squadron were you with and where was it based?
That was Fighter Squadron 31 at Kuopio, Ristala. I had no car, no girlfriend, no money because the salary was the lowest in Finnish administration or Air Force or
Really?
anything. Yeah, the lowest salary available. That was agreement that we contracted to serve with the lowest A1 salary class in the whole country. So I had no money, so I was very anxious to fly, so I was volunteering for the weekend quick alert service. So I was sitting there in weekends on Saturdays and Sundays, 2 hours with a pressure suit. And then we changed the pilot for 2 hours.
That must have been uncomfortable though.
Oh, it was nice, but very few alerts. Actually, many times the fighter control asked that, is Jyrki sitting there in the cockpit? Yes, he's there again. So they alerted me. Okay, take off, heading 240, 10,000 meters, just to get me some flying, because I have friends in the fighter control.
So they knew you were there already?
Yeah, so they let me fly without any intruders in the airspace.
So how many hours did you get on this tour, on this 1 year tour?
With the F model, I got 550 hours.
50 hours. And do you have any memorable stories from this jet that you can share with us?
Well, it was my, I think was my second or third solo flight at takeoff. When before rotating, I checked my airspeed and engine. It was 250 when you rotate initially, the nose up. The engine RPM, there are 2 rotation indicators because it's 2-spool engine. They normally both are at 100 RPM, 100%. At this time they were at 95 and 75. I said something is wrong, I decided. And I just go to idle, air brakes open, full brake in drag chute, and it stopped 50 meters before the end of the runway.
Ooh.
And I taxied back and checked the engine. There's the jet nozzle in the end of the engine. It didn't operate. It normally, when you have military power, it's closed, and it opens only with full afterburner. For some reason, it opened at military power, which means that it gives no thrust at all. So my squadron leader said that, good that you aborted, you never got off. So I had crashed if I hadn't aborted it. With 50 meters when I used all the brakes I had. On the next flight after this one, I took off and wanted to gear up, climbing. The jet pipe temperature went to 0.
Oh.
I thought, oh no, something again. But because there was still thrust and RPM was good, I thought that maybe it's the instrument. So I canceled the mission and burned some fuel and landed, and it was the instrument.
Wow.
But
Scary
I thought
stuff.
that, oh no, second flight and one problem again. It was no real problem, it was an indicator only.
Wow. Could you describe the MiG-21 F-13's cockpit for us? It looks very cramped.
It's typical late 50s, and there are switches all over the cockpit. And it really took some weeks sitting in the cockpit to learn them by heart, eyes closed to find everything. But once you get to learn them, you found them. But a lot of switching and checking and switching before you could even put the battery on. So it was not so pilot friendly as today. Compared to Draken, it's very pilot friendly cockpit, but the MiG it's full of switches which you have to know their position and be in correct place. If one is in wrong place, you can burn the engine when you start it.
Wow. So in 1970, you got sent to the Flight Test Center. Can you tell us about this?
Well, actually the contract was for 3 years. But after 2 years, pilots from the Air Force were going to Finnair. And the Air Force obviously wanted to keep me in the Air Force, and they decided that, hey, Jyrki is a flight engineer and a fighter pilot. That will make a good test pilot. Because last like in US, you know, most of the test pilots graduated are flight test engineers, and they are also aeronautical engineers. So I had this background, so they decided that, hey, Jyrki makes a good test pilot with this engineering background. So I said, hey, sounds good. So after just 2 years of the 3 years contract, they moved me to the flight test center, Finnish Air Force Flight Test Center, in late 1970. And there was 71 and 72 was a test pilot with local training while working. The older test pilot told me how you do this thing, and I was flying test flights for 2 years until there was a Finnish test pilot course beginning in 1973. And then I was accepted there because I was already there in the flight center.
Yeah.
So. But for 2 years I just flew test flights, being not actually test pilot, with actually no test pilot training, but learning while flying.
Yes. And what aircraft were you flying at this time in that 2-3 years?
Oh, the aircraft that time was Saab Zafir, de Havilland Beaver, and Fuga, and MiG-21 F.
So when you became an official test pilot, could you tell us some of the training you had and what kind of flights you would conduct?
Okay, that was 1 year course. The first Finnish test pilot course was in 1956, and this was test pilot course number 4, which I attended in 73, 74. And the training was with those aircraft that we had, which means Zafir, Fuga, MiG-21, and Beaver. We had one Beaver in Flight Test Center. And that the instruction was for maintenance test flying and research test flying. Controllability, stability, performance, things like that.
So did each flight differ to the last one, or would you do something new every time you went up?
There was first, in training, there was one flight with instructor, just like speed stability, and then you had your engineer behind you in the back seat and you made it yourself. And then you have made a report on that, which was inspected. It was like this, one training flight, one flight by yourself, and then the paperwork.
The boring bit.
Yeah, the bad side of the thing.
So obviously here to talk about the MiG-21. So could you tell us what kind of flying you would conduct and test with the MiG-21?
In the course, it was mostly a couple of performance flights and a couple of handling stability checks. Yeah, typically in squadron you maneuver more, but with the flight testing you stabilize more. You have to stabilize airspeed, altitude, attitude to get data which is stabilized. So many flights were just trying to stabilize your airspeed and altitude and attitude.
And as our viewers can see, we're standing behind another MiG-21. Can you tell us about this, and did you fly it yourself?
Yes, I did. When the older MiG needed replacement, at that time it was politically mandatory that the replacement will be supplied from the Soviet Union. So we had that time Drakens, and now we had to buy something from the East. And we had to select either Su-22, which was a strike fighter, or MiG-23 with a swing wing, or the later model MiG-21, the BIS. And we thought that the other two are not for us, but the BIS looks good because it's so much similar to the F model that training and things are easier. So we sent a team of pilots and mechanics to the Soviet Union in '78. And I was there as a test pilot from the flight test center. And we spent 2 months in the Soviet Union for training. We didn't fly there. We didn't need to fly because we thought we can fly the airplane, but it was a ground school.
And how did you get on with the Russians?
The training was in Russian, по-русски. And there was an interpreter who told us in Finnish. But after 2 weeks, we told him, shut up, because the Russian instructors were speaking very clearly, using the same words. And also in Russia, the aviation vocabulary it's much the same. And they were good pictures on the screen. So we learned so much Russian that we could follow the instruction without interpreters.
Oh, that's good then.
Yeah. And for me, it was good because I learned so much Russian that once we have got the airplanes to Finland, the Russians flew them to Kuopio. And we need to make the acceptance test flying. So actually in 1980, when the airplanes arrived at Rissala, we had 3 test pilots from test pilot center to go to test fly them. But when the other 2 guys look at the cockpit, they said, oh, Jyrki, this is all Russian. They said that we go home, Jyrki, you take care of those, because they couldn't fly it because all the labeling was in Russian.
Wow, okay.
I never flown the airplane yet, so they let me do so. I have test flown acceptance all these BIS models to Finnish Air Force.
Wow, okay.
I flew all of them.
And how many did you have?
22.
So yeah,
and then we have 4 more, actually 26 the total number.
Right.
So I signed them and said, хорошо, normal, accepted them.
All up to you.
So yeah, I have bought all those BISs to Finnish Air Force.
Brilliant.
Kind of bought them because I signed them, that they accepted, yeah.
So could you tell us the difference between the BIS and the F model?
Well, the BIS has radar. That's different. It has radar missiles and its radar capability, fighter radar in the nose. And it has a more advanced cockpit. Actually, in Finland, we put their Western avionics.
Okay.
So it made it more modern. We replaced all the Russian avionics and put their Western things. And performance-wise, it has the same maximum speed, same climb speed, same endurance. So that thing, they are the same, but the equipment is better because we modified them. And it has bigger wheels, which means bigger brakes. We did not use drag chute normally at all, because better brakes. But it wasn't so nice to fly because it's bulky, and it doesn't fly so nicely as the F model, which was like a silver dart. So it also had a stabilization system in pitch and roll, because it was not so stable in pitch and yaw like the F model.
And would it carry the same weapons as the F model?
The F had one 30mm cannon. This one has a 2-barrel 23mm gun. And the F had 2 missiles, IR missiles. This one can have up to 6 missiles, also radar missiles. So that was a difference. Better weaponry, but same performance. But not so nice to fly. And the visibility from the cockpit was worse than the F model.
Yeah, that one the F model does look a lot better.
Yeah, that was not so good.
You can't really see behind you, I'm assuming, yeah.
Oh no. There was a mirror above you, which you can see that your fin is coming with you. That's all you could see from the mirror.
So for our viewers out there, can you give us some stats about the MiG-21? Like, what was the fastest it could go? How high? What was your average speed you would travel?
Well, both airplanes had the same performance. The maximum Mach number was 205, and that was limited because of directional stability. And the service ceiling was limited to some 18,000 meters, practically, but you could climb higher. My best altitude is 21,300 meters, which is 70,000 feet. And at that altitude, it was still climbing at Mach 2. But there's a corner, what you call, when you go high altitude, you have your airspeed, indicate airspeed getting low, and the minimum was 500 to keep the engine running. And the max was 205 Mach, which is directional stability. And when you go higher, they come together. If you go above that, you either go too fast or too low. So at 21,000 meters, I thought that, okay, my Mach number is maximum, my airspeed is minimum. I can't go higher, the engine may quit. So I turned it upside down, stick all the way back, stop it climbing. It still climbed 300 meters, even stick all the way back and invert it. But I maintained the airspeed within limits.
Wow, that's impressive. So how many hours did you get on the MiG-21, and did you enjoy flying both types?
I flew some 800 plus hours with the BIS, and the total time with the MiG-21 is 1,400.
Wow, that's fair.
But as I told you, the endurance is short, so there are many flights.
Yeah.
Typically, a maximum altitude flight with full afterburner, you took off, and after 7 minutes, you were at 21,000 meters, Mach 2. And then you have 500 liters warning light burning, which means that shut down the afterburner, you lose the engine because the fuel is ending. So 7 minutes you were high and fast, you go to idle, and nicely, slowly, with idle, come back to base. The whole flight is 15 minutes.
Wow. It's not long at all, is it?
But you could high and fast.
Yes, of course.
But that's a typically fast climb to max altitude.
Would that often happen? Would you test that quite often?
Only in test flights.
Only in test flights, yeah.
Yeah.
So you also flew and tested the Hawk. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah. Of the 153 types I have flown, the people ask me which is the best aircraft, and I tell them it's British Airspace Hawk. The Hawk is really a nice aircraft in all respects. You sit there nicely, switches are nicely, I like the instrumentation, visibility out is good, it's easy to taxi, it's stable, it's very maneuverable, it goes fast, climbs well, and it goes far away. So as a whole, I like it. It's the best aircraft, overall aircraft I have ever flown.
So how did it actually handle? I'm guessing everyone says it's like a little sports car. Would this be correct in saying that?
It handles nicely. The stick forces are just good. Not too heavy, not too light. Responses in all directions is nice. Not too quick, not too low. So they designed a real good airplane.
And do you think this was the right aircraft to train students to go onto fast jets?
Yeah, I think it's a real nice aircraft.
And how many hours did you get on the Hawk?
1,100.
That's a lot. And you preferred this over the MiG? I'm surprised. I thought you were going to go say MiG-21.
Yeah, the F model MiG is my real fighter, but my most pleasant airplane to fly with the airplanes is the Hawk.
So how long did you spend at the test center?
I went there from Riissala in late 1970, and I retired. I was forced to retire when I was 60. Yeah, I had to leave the Air Force in August 2002. So as a pilot, I flew there 35 years, and as a test pilot, 32 years.
That's a hell of a career, certainly.
10,000 military flying hours.
And how many types?
23 in the Air Force.
Wow.
As a pilot in command.
Mm-hmm. You also took, I think you said 55,000 photographs in your time. Can you tell us how you got started with photography?
Well, I started when I was interested in airplanes when I was a small boy. I got my first camera in '53. And the first pictures of airplanes are taken here at Kymi Airfield. There was, the best time was the Air Force camp flying a Vihuri trainers here. And I started to shoot Air Force airplanes, and that just continued. And it was not so active until I bought my first system camera, Asahi Pentax, in '71, when I got more salary than as a line pilot. So since then I started to take photochromes, and it just grew up, and I got interested. And every time, year by year, I took more and more pictures. And then I found that in the Air Force, you could take air to air. Initially, I tried to take pictures while flying, flying the MiG with the left hand, taking pictures with the right hand, and using throttle with either hands. It was difficult to find formation. So after a couple of years, I decided that when I fly, I don't take pictures. But any time there were two airplanes going with any of them two-seater, I said, hey, you have an empty back seat, I come with you. And when we come from the training area back to base, let's fly formation, I take pictures. So then I got better pictures.
But you weren't the official Air Force photographer?
No, at early time it was almost prohibited to take pictures. I just took them. And year by year, everybody somehow realized that I had permission to take pictures, that I'm official photographer. So I became one kind of official photographer because I took the pictures and everybody knew that I take them. I supply them to headquarters and to squadrons, and they asked me to take pictures. So it somehow, I was never appointed, but I just became one kind of official, yeah.
And you've also become an author. Could you tell us about this and what books you have out?
Well, it all started in the Air Force when they were planning to... The Air Force made some annual books starting in the 70s. And I criticized them because they were just black and white, small pictures, small packed pictures, and no real good books. And I told them that make a good book. And they said, there was Air Force 80 years. Come and join the team. And I said, I will, but let's make a real good book, A4 size, big one, and use color. And actually, I was in the team, and I made the book at home. Oh, wow. It was official, but it just happened that I made it at home. Okay. All the layout and all things, put the books there. It was a success. Yes. Compared to other ones. Yeah. Normally they sold 100 or 200. Now they were sold 3,000 of these colored pictures. Yeah. And the publisher who made it asked me, hey, why don't you make us these kind of books with all of my 30,000 slides at that time? I said, I have no time to make books. Call me when I retire in 2002. And in 2002, they called me, the publisher. You promised to make pictures, a picture book for us. So they remembered. Yeah. I said, hey, why not? Okay, start with the MiG-21 in the Air Force. Yeah. Okay. So that started when I retired, 2002. And since then, I have made one book per year, mostly of the Air Force and Air Force aircraft.
Does each book, is it singled out for one aircraft, or is that a mixture of all the aircraft?
There are single airplane books are from MiG, Draken, Fuga, Hawk, Iljusin 28 and now Holland Nat. And there are 3 books of the Finnish Air Force, 8 years, 90 years, 100 years. And then there are 1 book, Pilot Laukkanen, my life story.
Wow.
And then there are 2 books of telling about from test pilots' diaries. And 1 history book from this local field.
So where can our viewers find these books online?
You can find them in the net. There are several net servicing bookstores in Finland. You
So
can
just put in
find
your name and they'll probably find them.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And those Air Force books and the aircraft books, they are in Finnish and in English.
So we're just going to go on to a more personal side of you now. So do you have any hobbies?
Yes, flying.
Just flying.
Mostly my hobby is flying with sailplanes and then biking
Biking, yeah.
and swimming. And I love sauna.
I think that's a national thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sauna, yes.
But I just, you know, the bicycle, I got my first bicycle in 55 when I was 12 years old. And that made it me available to come to this airfield. And the same bicycle is still outside the hangar.
Oh, really?
I used it this morning. I have been biking it for now from 55.
And it's still going?
63 years, the same bicycle, same airfield, same guy.
Brilliant.
So it's a kind of hobby, the biking.
Yeah. What's the favourite aircraft you've ever flown?
Of all airplanes, the Hawk.
The Hawk. Is there one you wish you could have flown?
Yeah, F-86 Sabre.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, because when I was in school, John Wayne was flying the F-86 over the clouds, and it was kind of a real jet fighter for the schoolboy. And I always wanted to fly F-86.
Oh, okay.
But it never came true. But what came true was to fly with the World War II fighter was the B-51.
Oh, right.
I managed to fly 2 flights solo with B-51.
That must have been special.
Yeah, that's my most special experience in aviation, is to fly alone with B-51.
Pretty impressive, yes.
Actually, I think I'm the only Finn who ever soloed B-51.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
a real Finn, not any American Finns, but living in Finland, a real Finn.
Wow.
People have been flying in the backseat for $10,000. I got to fly free, 2 flowers, half an hour each in the US.
Brilliant.
So that was kind of a lifetime experience.
Of course. So how many hours do you have altogether?
Well, there are 10,000 hours in the Air Force, 5,600 with sailplanes, and 2,300 with those civil airplanes. So it makes 17,900. 100 more and I'll hit the 18,000 flying
So
hours.
close.
Yeah.
And finally, do you ever get sick of talking about aviation?
Well, it's been my life.
Perfect answer.
Yeah.
Well, Jyrki, thanks very much for being on the show. It's been a pleasure to hear your story.
Thank you.